me. I'm Martha, and I'm the Heritage Collection Manager for the Nappanee Public Library and the Evelyn Lehman Culp Heritage Collection at the Nappanee Center. So tonight we're going to talk about the lost communities. Nappanee has 5, and I'm really excited to share them with you. So a little disclaimer, I'm not an expert on these communities, but I hope to share research that has been done and is great with these communities. So we'll get started. So what is a lost community? It's a town or settlement that is no longer in existence and whose stories are hardly told, and these communities are slowly blending into the community or to the countryside, and most of the information has been collected by research and interviewing families that have lived in those communities. So like I said, Nappanee has 5. They're Locke, which is located on County Road 50, between State Road 19 and County Road 3. Stumptown, which is located on County Road 11. Hastings, which is 1050 North and 425 West. And then Gravelton, which is located on County Road 13. And Hepton, which is the northwest corner of Scott Township, located on Hepton Road in that area. So first we're going to talk about the community of Locke. And there's a more detailed program about Locke and Locke's feud with Nappanee it's a Zoom program also. It's called Along Came Nappanee, and that is on November 23rd, also at 7 p.m. So Locke was platted on December 20th, 1865, with 47 lots laid out along 6 streets. There was Main Street, which was east and west. Division, Walnut, Mill, Poplar, Winder were all north and south. The Hartman Brothers store had originally started in Hepton, but was also in Locke, and at one point they had a store in both Locke and Nappanee. The 1881 Chapman's History of Elkhart County is the last to treat it as a village, and in 1893 was when the Locke's post office was discontinued. There, at Locke, there is still Main Street, Walnut, Yarrian, and Windsor streets. Before Locke, we do know that it was known as Whistler Town, or before it was known as Locke, it was known as Whistler Town. And in 1865 was when the sawmill started there. A couple things about Locke that we know. So we know a little bit about Locke in 1873. It had 3 dry goods stores, a drugstore, a grocery store, a hardware store, a tin shop, a furniture store, 2 shoe shops, 2 sawmills, 1 single shingle mill, a wagon making shop, a steam and grist and flouring mill, 3 blacksmith shops, 40 dwellings, a hotel, a public schoolhouse, which closed in 1963. And the belfry from that school is actually across the street from the Nappanee Center on the Country Cabinet building. And 1 church, and they also had 3 doctors. So they were a really bustling town in 1873. They're also one of the only communities that we know what their population was. So in 1870, their population was 167, and in 1873, it was about 200. But by 1905, there was only 25 to 30 people and a small store erected by E.J. Pippinger, which was the sole business activity. So I did mention a little bit about this, but Locke and Nappanee, they had a feud. Locke was upset because they were surpassed by the B&O Railroad. And so this rivalry kind of started between the two in 1875, when people, businesses, and dwellings started moving to Nappanee from Locke. Locke would have claimed that they couldn't find Nappanee on the map, and Nappanee was platted in December of 1874, so it wasn't included in the 1874 Atlas. Nappanee actually wrote, this was written in a newspaper, And Nappanee actually wrote back saying that they would have a national holiday when Locke was able to find Nappanee. Nappanee and Locke would write into the local newspapers of the Goshen Times and the Wakarisa Sun to complain about each other. And this happened from about 1876 to 79 as people continued to drift to Nappanee, taking their dwellings and businesses with them. Nappanee hoped that Locke would say that Nappanee had won and Locke had lost, and that they would have accepted their fate from the beginning, due to Nappanee being kind of sort of one of the reasons why they didn't really succeed very well. And like I said, if you join me for Along Came Nappanee, I'll actually go dive deeper into the Nappanee and Locke feud. So next we have Stumptown, which that was in about 1846 with Abram Stump, who acquired 160 acres south of Union Center Church. And there was a sawmill around in the spot, along with a general store that was really close to the spot also. A cider mill, veterinarian, and a grocery store. And the grist mill was started on the Stump property, but the idea was scrapped because they were not sure that there would be enough water power. The apple trees in Stumptown were thought to be direct products of Johnny Appleseed's efforts, and they didn't, but we're unable to confirm this fact due to Johnny Appleseed not keeping very detailed records about where he was. Poplar forests were on the land, and so the sawmill produced lumber for furniture shops. They also grew mint, onion, potatoes, and the muck soils surrounding Stumptown. At Stumptown also is Geyer's Dam, which is a large ravine and pond, and the earthen dam held back the water that drains into the valley. Glass from the Lamb Brother and Green factory was mixed in with the soil to prevent muskrats from boring through the dam. Community building was also used for meetings and other community events. So we do know about the Union Valley Groceries, Dry Goods, Booths, and Shoe Store. That was a general store in Stumptown that dates back to before the Civil War. The weighing scales used in the store had been patented on July 24th, 1855, and it was run by John Stump. In the 1870 census, it actually lists him as being the storekeeper and owner of Stumptown. The general store is still believed to be standing today at County Road 13 and US 6, and it was used as onion storage. And I've actually been in this building, and it's pretty cool. On the inside, you can see where the doors were and where the windows were and everything like that in the general store. The sign of the store is actually still in existence. It is a 17-foot long poplar wood sign, and it survived a tornado and a demolition crew. It was found in the walls of a house that was demolished near the original site of the general store. And the museum, the Nappanee Center, actually has possession of the sign, and we're waiting to figure out how to properly display the sign. So next we have Gravelton, which Gravelton was platted in 1876 by David Broombach, and is in the presence of a gravel pit. And it may have gone by the nickname of Dogtown. It consisted of a general store, blacksmith shop, a train station, a school, a post office, and a couple of churches, and about 20 houses. The peak population was about 75 to 100 people. And the post office operated from 1876 to 1906. The Gravelton's school closed in 1947, and David Broombach also operated a grocery and dry goods store in Gravelton. So trains in Gravelton, because they were right along the B&O Railroad, it was not a regular stop, but whoever wanted a ride had to flag down their own train. The milkshake train was one that usually stopped. It was named the milkshake train for its bumpy ride, and that it would pick up containers of milk that the farmers placed by the tracks. The train also had one or two passenger cars along with several freight trains or freight cars so that they could pick up people and take them along the way. It was also the site of several train wrecks, the worst one being in November of 1884, where a freight train and a passenger train collided, and there were 7 freight trains cars were derailed, and this littered the rails with oysters, beef hides, hay, wooden doors, and window sashes. Coal, along during the Depression, people would actually jump on the trains and push coal off so that they could have coal to heat their homes. So next we have Hastings, and it was established in 1890, and it was described as just a crossroads with a store, a little brick school, a church, and a few houses sprinkled along the road. The general store served as the post office, and it had a second-story auditorium that held square dances and political rallies. The brick schoolhouse was erected in 1896, and there was a barbershop, an ice house, a tire mill, and a town band. The post office operated from 1891 to 1903. It was surrounded by swamps, but the swamps were drained, and the land produced valuable crops of onion, hemp, spearmint, peppermint, cabbage, and pickles. The cabbage was taken to Libby McNeil and Libby's sauerkraut factory in Nappanee, and they were known as leaders in onion, hemp, and mint, and they are also nicknamed the Island because of being in a swamp. The Island Chapel was a church that was out there. I think now currently they turned it into a home. It was built in 1875, and it was one of 3 churches served by the same preacher. So one church would have the preacher in the morning, the next would have him in the evening, and the third wouldn't have a preacher at all for that Sunday. And that's how they kind of did the rotation. So next we have Hepton, which this was platted by Jacob Conrad, and it owed its existence to a sawmill, and it was named for the Carl Hepler family, who had moved to the area in 1837, but it may have also been referred to as Hepton because of the Heckemans that lived in the area. It consisted of a post office, school, church, tile mill, blacksmith shop, a peppermint distillery, a creamery, and a general store. There were 36 lots in Hepton, but very few were sold. And they had the streets were north, center, south, east, and west. And the post office operated from 1868 to 1881. And the school was located a half-mile northwest of town. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the people who helped shape these communities. And I picked a few from different people from these communities who I felt in doing my research had a very impactfulness on the communities. So for Locke, it's George and Henry Eby, in which their hometown was Nappanee, Ontario, and they claim to have named Nappanee after their hometown, unless you're related to the Metzlers, and then the Metzlers named Nappanee. They helped plat Locke, and then they also opened Locke Station here in Nappanee when they were trying to get business out of Nappanee and to Locke. So they created this little train depot on railroad land and not regular land. George held office as the Justice of the Peace, and Henry was a woodworker. and they started a general merchandise and lumber business after Locke was platted. And even though they're mentioned a lot in Nappanee history and things like that, there's no real clear um, way to know if they actually moved to Nappanee or if they stayed in Locke. Next with Stumptown is the Stumps. So they settled in Union Township in 1838, and Daniel Stump purchased close to 1,200 acres in Union Township and gave each of his children a parcel of land. So his son, Abraham, or Sawmill Abe, acquired the 160 acres south of Union Center Church of the Brethren, which became Stumptown. Abram's son, John, owned it after him and was the storekeeper of the Union Valley. And I could go on and on and on about the Stumps also. In Gravelton, we have Victor Broombach, which he was remembered most from Gravelton, and he bought fur pelts from hunters and shipped them to larger cities to be made into coats and stoles. Boys would actually steal furs out of his barn and try and sell them back to him. They would usually got away with the pranks, and sometimes they didn't. The one time that he didn't, he figured it out, and he thought it was said that he thought that he bought the small muskrat fur 3 times. In Hastings, we have Henry Geyer. I couldn't find a lot of information about him, but I do know that he donated the land to create the island chapel. For Hepton, we have Jacob Conrad, and he platted Hepton, and he immigrated from Germany, and he actually manufactured wagons in Hepton, and some of them won top prizes at the county fair. He later moved to Bremen. So out of these communities, there's a lot of stories and legends. One of them being John Dillinger. He was very much in our area, even though he never made it to Nappanee. There was a bank in Nappanee that had installed a special alarm, and it was said that the constable was afraid of him and would run, and they would play tricks on him, saying that he was looking for him and all this kind of stuff, and he would actually run and hide because he was that afraid. In the 1930s, he robbed a gas station in Gravelton at the County Road 15 in US 6, and it was said that he raced through Stumptown to go back to Benton, where he was hiding out. In 1934, he stopped in Hastings to ask for directions to Warsaw, which they must have been extremely good directions, because a few days later, he robbed the Warsaw police station for guns and bulletproof vests. So in July 9th of 1863, the Confederate Army had captured Cordon, Indiana, and they had stolen money, horses, and other material goods. And so in 1864, Confederate spies were actually planning an attack on Chicago. And the residents of Stumptown feared that the Confederates would reach Elkhart County and they would be forced to hand over their money. They banded together and buried their silver and gold coins in a field. While some think that the gold is still in the field, to everyone's knowledge, it was actually recovered and removed from the field. Next, we have the panther hunt. So in the 1940s, a panther was spotted around Stumptown eating people's livestock. So a hunting party was assembled. The panther was never found because he was said to have been lost in a hayfield, that he just disappeared out of thin air.